So thank you very much, Lena, for accepting our interview to talk about your fascinating book with Amsterdam University Press. Can you briefly introduce yourself, please?
Yes, of course. Thanks a lot for having me here. And so I'm currently working at the University of Zurich, where I'm a postdoctoral researcher in the Department of History, working in an interdisciplinary project. But I'm also an associate lecturer at the Department of Social Anthropology and Cultural Studies. And I have a background in social anthropology and also in China studies. And I studied these subjects in Berlin, Rome, and in Shanghai. And I did my PhD in social anthropology at the University of Zurich. So I've been working on two major, slightly different projects there. And one is about rural-urban migration. And I've been looking at this both in the city and in the countryside. So this is what we're going to talk about today. But I'm also working, or since about 2 years, I've been working on a project on Swiss-Chinese entanglements in digital infrastructures and in fiber optic networks. And so broadly speaking about these two research foci, so I'm interested in the socio-technical study of translocal China and also of global China. And specifically, I've been interested in the transmission and transformation of knowledge and skill, and also in socio-technical systems, in food production, in digital infrastructures, and also in work, including in divisions of labor or gender divisions or generational divisions of labor as well.
Sounds fascinating, and it encompasses some of the most cutting-edge areas, in our field. So I'm really excited to talk to you more about your research, especially in this book that we are going to discuss. So can you tell us what motivated you to do research on rural-urban migration and the argo-technological change in China?
Yes. So it all started from a general interest in migration phenomena and also in a wish to understand better the role of skill and knowledge in migration. And so, knowledge also that is transmitted outside of formal educational structures. So I started out from the city, doing research in Shanghai among Anhui migrants and who were working in the restaurant and street food sector. And then we got along quite well also during the research, and they took me home to their rural home in Anhui during the Chinese New Year when they returned. And there I really realized how important it is to take into consideration also the places of origin. And I also realized that agricultural technologies play quite an important role in migration. I mean, also in other places, but in China in particular as well. So, I found that this aspect has been quite overlooked in migration studies because a lot has been written on the reform period of the 1980s and the factors that pushed migrants to migrate and to leave the countryside to work in the cities, such as the loosening of the household registration system and the new efficiencies of household farming that has been reintroduced in that time, and also the social and economic necessities, as well as the urban thirst for cheap labor from the countryside. So, but in all of these factors, what has been quite overlooked is that the very broad spread of green revolution technologies or post-green revolution technologies of the 1960s and 70s. I mean, much of this has really been pushed by the Chinese government and by local governments, has also set free millions of farmers from their land, and mainly through their labor-saving capacity. And they're really complex, a complex relationship to migration that I explore in this book.
And indeed, it's an aspect that's often been sort of overlooked, so I'm really glad that you have attended to these aspects. So what are the key findings or messages of this book by Amsterdam University Press?
Yes, so just in general, what this book deals with is, or what I explore in this book is the conflicting pressures of people that, or of households. I take a household strategy approach, and I look at the pressure that people are feeling pushed to migrate on the one hand to the cities, to work there, and or also to study there sometimes, but and also at the same time they're feeling pushed to stay home and to preserve their fields, or the fields that have been allocated to them, and to preserve these as a safety net for the often very precarious situation that they face in the cities. And then the particularity with rice farming is that, or with wet rice farming, is that you need a certain number of people who stay home and who have the necessary knowledge and skills to preserve these rice fields, to cultivate them continuously. Because if you want to preserve the soil quality and to preserve their value, they need to be cultivated continuously. So yeah, so this obviously is a special challenge then, because if people are moving to the city, then these people are lacking in the countryside. So I mainly looked in this book at how people deal with these, how households deal with these conflicting pressures between migration and farming. And yeah, I conducted ethnographic fieldwork in the city and also in the countryside. And I looked at at how rural and also migrants deal with these pressures. And I also relied on I draw on some written sources as well. So more generally speaking, in this book, I try to advance and to build on the material turn in migration studies by proposing that we need to pay more attention to the role of knowledge and skill in migration. And I look at both staying and migrating household members and propose to look at them as a community of practice, actually. And in my case here, it's a farming community of practice that is concerned with how to preserve the fields back home. And this also applies to the younger migrant generation, who often does not have a lot of skills to farm anymore, and who or they lack these knowledge altogether because they have never really farmed, but still this resource preservation for the family is nevertheless important, and they need to deal with that as well. So I argue that to better understand migration phenomena and also migrant home relationships, it's really useful to take such a skill perspective and to look at both at migrants and those who stay, and also at their material world. So I've been paying special attention to these green revolution technologies and how they set free labor on the one hand, but also how they also give farmers new options of dealing with their situation. So at the core of the book is one chapter about land use strategies, and I show about 12 different strategies here. I mean, there are obviously others as well in China, but I mainly focus on a village in Hunan province, and I found these 12 strategies applied there, and sometimes also in combination, depending on the specific household situation. And so these really range from more social strategies, such as leaving behind family members, renting out the fields to others, or also practicing mutual aid strategies, or to also more technical strategies, such as using labor-saving technologies like mechanization or farm chemicals, or switching to less labor-intensive crops, or to only one rice harvest a year instead of two, or to direct seeding instead of transplanting. I mean, there is a whole range of things. And so to come to my findings, I have three main findings in this book. And the first one is in this regard that the social and the technical are really closely interwoven. So what appears to us here as ostensibly technical farming decisions are really always also social decisions that are closely interlinked with the migration phenomenon. So in taking these seemingly operational decisions, farmers are actually pursuing various long-term and mid-term strategies, and also performing social responsibilities like, so their farming decisions take into consideration aspects like educational or career or marriage aspirations or childcare, elderly care, and also, more generally, the social and economic reproduction of the household and of the patriline. So, I found that all of this is actually materially reflected in the village. So in the materiality of the village and the fields. So just to give an example, if you see, for example, a field in Hunan and there is not rice grown in this field, but a local crop called lamb-rush, then people who know, they can read from this field that it's likely that there is an old woman cultivating this field because she has been left behind maybe by other household members and then switched to this less labor intensive crop, but which then requires a lot of manual skills at home for processing this crop, which is what many elderly women in the countryside have. Or if you see a field with long-standing rice stubbles, and then people who know, they can see that this must have been mechanically harvested, and there are most likely some migrants in the city behind who finance this and who take care of the fields from afar. And this also brings me to my second finding, which is related to farmers' agency. And so in this book, I take an actor-centered perspective, and I really don't want to deny the difficult situation that many of the families I have met and talked to are in, and really the difficulties of taking these decisions, such as leaving behind a child or an elderly person and maybe not seeing this child for even years sometimes, and also for putting up with the really often very tiring and dangerous or precarious city life. But I think we also need to, I don't want to really to victimize the people I interviewed. So I prefer to draw attention to their knowledge and capabilities of dealing with this difficult situation. And so then I think that in the field, we can really see a more subtle form of agency, which is really often tacit, not very outspoken, and really embedded in everyday life tasks, such as fertilizing a field or how you plow a field or harvest it. And so these are really different from outright resistance, like in the Scotian sense, for example. And I found that many of these strategies then they follow farmers' own projects, and whether deliberately or not, they often actually are in line also with what the central government expects of farmers. So they do not always go against the government, but they also do what people still follow their own projects in doing this, but with other strategies that are really more about the de-intensification of rice farming. These ones, I found that they often do also go against the government, although the central and the local governments may also differ here in their approach. And then my third finding, just briefly, is about to challenge prevailing narratives of backwardness and progress. And so I found here that in the literature or in public discourse, peasants are commonly portrayed in China as passive and as backwards. And here I really show that farmers are actually also forward-looking agents who really actively shape China's modernity. And so be it by migrating and literally building up Chinese cities, for example, in the case of construction workers, or by staying behind and by upholding this whole system and also enabling other household members to migrate.
This is so fascinating, you know, the materiality aspect of it, but also you mentioned this very important aspect of the agency. And also, you know, because I do, you know, this network is about education mobility. So I'm most interested in the education aspect of this. And like, for instance, just now you talked about all these strategies utilized by the peasants. And in fact, they can be very forward looking and very advanced. So, and you also mentioned that there's this second generation or even third generation sort of peasant or migrant peasants. They may not even have the knowledge, or they may not have done farming themselves. So I'm just very interested in the education aspect. So how do they manage all these, you know, all these knowledge? How do they educate their younger generation, or how do they manage, you know?
Well, I found that much of the hope is really placed on children. And yeah, we heard this in earlier episodes of your podcast as well, that farmers really pay a lot of, they really place a lot of hope in their children, and education is commonly seen as a way out of farming and as a way to change the fate and to aim for a better life, also not only for the child who will be educated, but then also because that person will then eventually take care of the elderly parents. So a lot of investments are taken in view of educating the children. For example, I mean, this too, I found that farmers grow, for example, certain cash crops specifically and instead of rice, just to earn money for the children's education, or that elderly parents migrate to earn money again for the children. So I think this is actually very closely interwoven here.
Yeah, and it's like the household strategy or the household concept that you use. I think it's really relevant, right? So the entire household sort of strategize, or they maybe sometimes they don't so much strategize, but they feel that, you know, we need cash. So we need to produce some cash crops that would allow them to get cash in order to support their children's education.
Yes.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. So, you know, while conducting this research, was there any interesting anecdotes that you can share with us?
Well, I think the time that really made the deepest impression on me was really the very first time I went to the countryside for a longer time. And this was when these Anhui migrants that I mentioned in 2008 took me home to their rural village during the countryside, during the Chinese New Year. And so at that time, it was winter time. It was even snowing, even though this counts as the south of China. And there was a big snowstorm, and we didn't even really know how we would get to the village. So I found myself then in Shanghai in a small karaoke room, spending the night there with what felt like half of the village, with me crouched into the small room and waiting for a bus that would come to pick us up, because all the other transportation means had failed. So, and when we finally then got there to the village, I found that I really had to learn a lot of things about life, everyday life in the countryside. Like, I had to learn how to fetch water from a well, how to build a fire from rice straw to heat up that water, and then how to wash myself with a bowl full of that water. And I didn't know how I could manage because there wasn't a lot of water, and at that time it was rather scarce, and I only had a small bowl, and so they had to show me how I could manage to wash myself. And then they were laughing about me and saying, wow, so don't foreigners wash? And it was quite an interesting experience that I was perceived in that way. And yeah, also it was extremely cold because it's like I said, it counts as the south of China where I've been. Even though there was snow outside, there was no heating. And I mean, yeah, and so I really felt a lot of also physical discomfort, or I wasn't really used to, I mean, coming from a northern country, I was used to central heating, but not how to keep my body warm without heating. So I had to dress extremely many clothes to cope with this physically. And then the children in the village, they asked me, so are you a man or are you a woman? I mean, so they couldn't recognize anymore. So yeah, and this really left, I mean, a deep impression on me, this experience. I mean, the next time I was better prepared than in terms of clothing. And yeah, but I mean, this experience really then made me aware of the importance of taking into consideration migrants' places of origin also when studying migration, and also inspired then this book's topic.
Yeah, it sounds such a striking experience, right? And so you were sort of confronted with a very, very different set of realities that was so almost shocking to you in a sense. So you had to had such a steep learning curve, right?
Yes.
During that period. Yeah, wow, really striking. So many of our members in this network are interested in the publication process. So can you share with us how you proposed your book to Amsterdam University Press and whether there were any highlights or challenges in this process?
Sure. So the first, about choosing the press, I did quite some research to figure out which press would be really suitable for this particular book's topic. And then I found that there is this book series at Amsterdam University Press, which is called New Mobilities in Asia. And I thought that my book's topic really fit quite well into this series. So I also called up the press's editor then to ask if they had a general interest in this topic, and they agreed. So I started preparing a book proposal then, and I put quite a lot of effort into this book proposal, and I found it very helpful here to have some book proposals of colleagues of mine who had already published books, and to look at how this type of genre is written, because it's not something that we write very often in our academic lives. So in writing that proposal, I then also asked colleagues to give me some feedback on the proposal, and I handed it in, and it was eventually accepted, and they invited me to hand in my manuscript. So, and preparing the manuscript then, apart from incorporating a lot of feedback that I had received from colleagues and also during conference presentations, and also just trying to make the manuscript more readable to a wider audience. I found it, I took some books from the same series, and I looked at especially at the introductions and conclusions to learn more about the type of structure that is expected from the book, and especially the introduction. So, and I did that, and I found that there were some similarities in how these books were presented, and I tried to do that similarly. And then, I also found it very useful before the very first submission of my manuscript to really set myself a time limit on when I would submit the manuscript, because it's so easy to go on for ages and to work more and more. And so I just set a deadline, and I submitted the manuscript by that deadline, knowing that I will have to revise things anyway after it passes the peer review process. And so then it went quite smoothly. Actually, I received very constructive and positive reviews also from two researchers who I really admire a lot and who I've always appreciated a lot. And yeah, luckily they revealed their names to me then and after the reviews. So yeah, the main challenge then for me was really to revise the manuscript according to the reviews. During this really coincided with the time that the coronavirus lockdown took place in Switzerland, and I had care duties at the same time while having to revise the manuscript. And
wow,
yeah, that was quite challenging, but I was lucky here to have really very concrete suggestions from the peer reviewers of what I should change or what I should add, and this helped me to focus. Yes, and then before submitting the final revised manuscript, I again found it very difficult to let go because again here I found that data had to be updated in the meantime as well, because the whole process took some time and new statistics had appeared in the meantime, and which I tried to incorporate. And I could have gone on for ages, but also here I really set myself a time limit, and I stuck to that and submitted the book. And then yes, and then after the submission, I also applied for an open access grant by the Swiss National Science Foundation, which has also funded part of the research for this book. And luckily I got it. And so I'm really happy now that a lot of, to make this book available to many people, and including maybe some of the research partners who can read English or look at the photos.
Yeah, it makes such a great difference to have the book be open access. It's really good to be able to share the insights of your book with a wider audience. Yeah, that's really nice. And also, so was this book based on your PhD thesis?
Yes, this was based on my PhD thesis, which I then revised quite thoroughly. And
so can you tell me the sort of timeline? So from your PhD thesis, you revise it, and then for the first submission of the manuscript, right? So how much time did it take you to revise from your PhD to the first submission?
Well, directly after the defense, I first took a break and did not look at the manuscript anymore. Because I got employed relatively quickly in a different project and had to work on that. And then I found it helpful to print out the whole thesis and to really use paper and pen and to read it through in a whole flow, and then only then you can really pay attention to where you have maybe repetitions or places that are hard to read. And so I corrected this first with the paper and pen and did this over a couple of months. I did these smaller revisions, but then I got 2 months off from my project for really finalizing the manuscript. So then I worked basically for 2 months on finalizing the manuscript before the very first submission, and then it took again a couple of months to have the reviews and to revise these. And there were not so many revisions actually that I had to do, but so it's hard to say how much time I really.
But it's such a painstaking process, right? It's quite a long process. If you now that you have revealed more about the timeline, it's actually quite a process, right? Yeah, but it's really good that you shared all these tips about reading your colleagues' sort of proposal samples, and then also looking specifically at books from the same series and looking at their introduction, for instance, so that you can pick up the sense of their style, right? Yeah, I think these are really good suggestions for our network members.
I did this, I spent quite a lot of work into this preparatory work, and yeah, also read obviously some guideline or some books, or asked to some colleagues about the differences between dissertations and books, and what should be changed. And
yeah, so is it true that the key is to make your writing much easier to understand, much more accessible to a general audience?
Yeah, right? I mean, this was one of the main jobs that I did, really to make this more vivid again. And I mean, quite some time had passed between the field research and then between the book publication process. So it helped me a lot also to look again at old photographs from the fields, or to look at some field notes again, to really also incorporate some of the ethnographic material that I had collected, and to make it more interesting to read.
Yeah, I see. Yeah, that's really insightful. Thank you. So what are your plans or next steps for this project?
Yes, so yeah, at the moment I'm mainly working on trying to make the book's content available to a wider audience, for example, through seminars or blog posts or interviews, and also like we're doing now, this podcast. I think it's a really great way to share the book's content. And yeah, because of the pandemic, it has been quite some time that I wasn't able to go back to China and to follow up on the book's topic. I mean, except for using WeChat and to communicate with some of my interlocutors. But so I've been mainly focusing now on my new project on digital infrastructures. But in the midterm, I'm planning to build on these two, or to combine these two research foci on agriculture on the one hand, and on digital infrastructures, and also global China on the other hand, and to make a new project out of this.
Yeah, that sounds like a very exciting project in the making. Yeah, so we look forward to learning more about your new exciting project. So is there anything else that you want to share with us today?
Maybe just some two thoughts that I have now thinking about, in the framework of this network on research on Chinese educational mobilities, because my book is not explicitly about education, as we already talked about, but like I said, many of the strategies that I observed are, and many of the farming decisions and also migration decisions are really closely linked to education, because many of these strategies aim at financing the children's education. So I think then, to take this on a more general level, it's really helpful here when doing research on education to focus also on all these people, and also the things that are behind these educational migrants that enable them to migrate in the first place. My second thought, on a more individual level, looking more at individual interlocutors, I think it's actually quite fruitful to think, to bring these two foci together on educational mobility on the one hand, but also on knowledge and skill acquired outside formal educational structures on the other hand, because they're very often, I mean, people often have, or usually have, both types of, I mean, academic knowledge as well as some tacit embodied knowledge, and I think they're also closely interrelated in a person or in society. So I think it's quite fruitful also to look at both of these aspects together.
Yes. And I think this is such a resounding reminder for researchers in education mobilities, because it's so important to take a systemic sort of view, to look at things as a whole, right? Like education decisions are often motivated by or shaped by the these argo-technological sort of considerations or materialities and vice versa. So yeah, thank you so much for your reminders and thoughts. These are really, really helpful for our network members. Thank you, Lena.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Cora, for having me.
Thank you.